We back with another episode on the Daily Vedantic, and today's reflection is on all of the modern myths that the culture around us not only want us to believe, but successfully get us to believe. The average American is subjected to 2,800 advertisements a day. No matter the mental fortitude you might think you have, it's hard to compete with 2,800 messages a day telling you things like, you're not enough. Beauty equals worth. Happiness can be bought. These are just a few of the messages that are sent to us so frequently that we just accept them as truth. We don't even question them. These modern myths like, you're not enough. Beauty equals worth. Happiness can be bought. There are a handful more that we're told. Not only are you told you're little, you're not enough, and enough is way up here, just within reach, but seemingly always outside your grasp. You're told things like your outside appearance is your worth to society. Think about every lighthouse for any society in history. Socrates, Buddha, Christ, Augustine, Aquinas, Spinoza. Does anyone even remember what they looked like? Did that matter? Some of them were downright unattractive. And that had no bearing on the impact that they could have on the culture around them, the value that they could have in the culture around them. Happiness can be bought. Have you ever bought sustainable happiness? Or is it more like a drug, where you buy something, you get a little jolt that quickly fades and needs another hit and another hit and another hit? That is an addiction. That is not a state of being. Happiness is a state of being. It has nothing to do with any mode of having. We know this in our own lives. Just look at the last, if you're 18, you got 18 years of data. 28, you got 28 years of data. Your 30s and your 40s, you have even more data. Can happiness be bought? Was happiness in your life ever bought? Was that state of being ever bought? Or was it this illusory jolt or hit that you got for a limited time that required something bigger, better, badder, just to get back to that same threshold? That is the downward spiral of addiction. Or what about another one? Newer is always better. Newer is always better. If something's old, well, it's obviously obsolete. But you buy enough gadgets and you're like, oh my God, this is just complicating my life more and more. For my work in being a startup investor, I bought the Apple Vision Pro, knowing there's a good chance that I was going to return it. I thought I would at least get 2-3 weeks of enjoyment out of it. It was probably on my head for about maybe 40 minutes before. It's like, okay, well, this is just extra complicating in my life. Keeping another device charged, syncing the different applications. You get enough of these devices, you realize, oh my God, I want to simplify my life. And sometimes pen and paper, nice journal, is irreplaceable. No matter what newfangled e-ink device comes out. And the same is absolutely true for philosophy. Do we need some new self-help book? The self-help section is now the biggest section, the average bookstore, the biggest section. From one that was just an aisle or maybe an end cap 20, 30 years ago, is now taking up the most space, the average bookstore. How big does the space need to get? The entire bookstore? The entirety of Amazon before we realize, maybe newer isn't actually delivering on its promise. Maybe, as my teacher Joseph loves to say, maybe it's out with the new. And it's worth rescuing the old. Rick Rubin, the famed music producer, said on a podcast, he doesn't really read anything that isn't at least 1,000 years old. Got to a place in his life, wicked, wise individual. And he said he got to a place in life where he just felt like, if it's survived over 1,000 years, then it probably has value. And yet we're so quick to say, well, if it's more than 5, 10, 15 years old, then it's probably obsolete wisdom. Another modern myth is quantity over quality. We are a culture of quantity. If someone has 15 million followers, well, they must have quality within their posts. If it's the most popular X, Y, or Z, then it's got to be the best. The truth is, quality actually has nothing to do with quantity. The best, that term is singular. The best in any field has nothing to do with quantity. There are not a million Michael Jordans. The best in a field gets to that extremely rare echelon of quality because they don't do what the quantity is doing. They don't do what the masses are doing. And they are the ones that understand the secret that quality actually has nothing to do with quantity. Another modern myth is that more is always better. But it doesn't take but 30 seconds of imagination to realize how idiotic that modern myth is. As Alan Watts used to say, enough is as good as a feast. You can't eat 12 steaks. You can't drive 12 cars. You can't live in 12 homes at the same time. More is not better. Enough, well, that is the best. Last but not least, a message that we're told over and over and over and over each day, like these others, is that life is a competition. The famed startup investor Peter Thiel beautifully unwinds this strange notion that has made it into every one of our heads. A chapter in his best-selling book, 0 to 1, is titled Competition is for Losers. He talks about the example of when he was in law school at Stanford, he thought he needed to make it to working the Supreme Court. In his best-selling book, 0 to 1, he talks about in one of his chapters titled Competition is for Losers. When he says that when he was a law student at Stanford, coming out of Stanford Law, everyone, the number one job to try to get is to be a clerk at the Supreme Court. And only the best and the brightest would get such a job. From all of the law schools, all of the pre-law students to those graduating, they're all competing for these tiny number of jobs. And he bucked that trend. Ended up starting PayPal, selling that for $2 billion. And he just skipped the whole thing. Instead of going for this narrow corridor with tens of thousands of people trying to get through it, he zagged when everybody was zigging, and he built a tech company, starting it in the 90s before tech was all the rage. And, well, him going in a different direction took him to a place that he described as so much better than he could have ever imagined. But the strangest part was it had none of the competition. That the path that would have ended up with far less fortune, far less prestige, far less of all of the aspects that the average law student wanted, far fewer would even consider. Competition is not only just for losers, competition creates a separation between you and me. It creates a separation between you and the world. And this modern myth that life is a competition takes you down a road where you're only left with one viewpoint. You are separate from the world. So many of us are trying to win just so that we can belong. So we'll finally belong. We'll finally feel like we're worth something. The very lens in which we view the world to try to win is the approach that creates the separation in the first place. These modern myths are articulated in 1,000 different ways in the course of a day. But they are just that, myths. They are not reality. So as you take to a timeless wisdom, choose any that have lasted over 1,000 years, you start to see the contrast between these modern beliefs and these timeless principles. Especially with a daily reflective practice, a grounding wire, an inoculation from the virus of attachment, of the ads that you'll see an hour later, the commercials you'll see on TV, the lunch you'll have with friends that talk about whatever they're wrapped up into because, well, they're hit with the same ads. Touch that grounding wire each morning. And over time, you're able to say, nice try, society. Nice effing try. That is today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic. We'll see you next time.